Welcome, everyone. Dr. Stephen Hobbs here, and joining me today is Doug Lawrence. We're both with the International Mentoring Community, and we're going to take a look at coaching and mentoring, and we're going to do it more through a conversational style. We're hoping that a few people will jump in and add to that conversation. If not, Doug and I will share a little bit about coaching and mentoring. And what we're going to do is take a look at a definition of coaching, definition of mentoring, and then we're going to look at their connection, their competition, and their collaboration. So this is very much a fun approach. We're hoping this is not meant to be like a formal presentation. Even though we have slides, we'll be popping in and out of them depending on who joins us. And we're just using the share function here on Zoom. So just to give you a heads up that we'll be probably popping in and out as we go. So to get us started, what I'm going to do is just share the screen, get us set up. And what we're doing is we're taking a look at coaching and mentoring. Now, what becomes really interesting here is that the most used search term is coaching and mentoring versus mentoring and coaching. I found that kind of interesting. And then I sat back and went, oh, hang on a minute. Most people would probably know about coaching nowadays because it has really been brought to the forefront, mentoring a little bit more into the background. I would like to suggest that Doug and I think Doug, you'll agree with me, that we're going to see if we can flip that around and get mentoring as sort of into the foreground. But at least you'll notice it's not coaching and or mentoring, it's coaching and mentoring. And I'm hoping that through this presentation, you'll get a sense that they are workable. They can work together. Now, I also just like to acknowledge is that talentc.ca and wealthmovement.com are the sponsors of this presentation. Talentc.ca is linked to Doug. Wealth Movement is linked to myself. So let's get started here. Now, one of the core elements of our presentation today is it's not cast in stone. What we're attempting to do is bring in some sense of an illustration because there is a convergence and an emergence here. The convergence is that we're looking at the and here of coaching and mentoring, and there's an emergence that one can use one of them, one can use another, and or they can be blended together. But there are some subtle points that we want to bring forward as we're doing this. Now, I'm just going to check to see if there's anyone who is attempting to come in. I don't see that at this point in time. So I think we're okay, Doug. We'll just keep moving forward, okay? So Now, as I mentioned at the top, coaching and mentoring through a bit of a definition and then the connection, competition, and collaboration. And then we'll end up with the now what. Now, towards the end, what's going to happen with you, Doug?
Towards the end, I have to drop off a few minutes early. I have a mentoring session that I'm involved in, and I need to be there. So my apologies to our listeners, but when you have a mentoring practice, that sometimes takes priority over a lot of other things.
Yeah, we understand it. And I will just acknowledge for Doug, for everyone, if you're just meeting us for the first time, Doug is very much in deep practice around mentoring, much more than myself. I tend to sit a little bit more in the background with it, with IMC and even in my own work at this point in time. But that might start to shift in terms of me doing a little bit more mentoring as time goes by. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Okay, so let's get back into the sharing here. The other point that I would like to make is that the sources of all of this information today comes from practical experiences, just mentioned that, but it's also published books. Doug, you've published 2 now.
Yep.
And I've published 3 related to this topic and a number of others that sort of, if from a ripple effect, throw the stone in the pond, rippling out, there's some published books. I did some informal research, had a little bit of fun there. And there's obviously these continuing conversations that we have. That's what we're drawing from at this point in time. just a little bit about that informal research component is that I went to Google, YouTube, and I put in what is coaching, what is mentoring, and then coaching and mentoring, mentoring and coaching. And I took the first 21 results for each of those combinations and searched out if there was any patterns or anything at this point in time. And I did find a few. Some of them have ended up in here, and there's sort of the subtle aspects of what we want to get at. But in terms of educating approaches, mentor and coach, mentoring and coaching are 2 of 10. And now this work is from myself in terms of a book I wrote called Help Them Help You. And I acknowledge that mentor and coach are on the right side, where you got facilitator, instructor, trainer, consultant on the left. A little bit more of this left side is what we call teach on the reach. The mentor, coach, shifter, counselor is like guide on the ride. And when you get into weaver, celebrant, navigator, you end up a little bit more with sage off the page. And it's just a playful way of looking at the placement. I'm just using this to acknowledge is that mentor and coach, there is a similarity, and there are 2 of many approaches that you can use in support of life as it unfolds. Now, what we're going to do is just take a quick look at the International Coaching Federation definition of coaching. And you can certainly read it on your own here. And if you want to get a copy of this presentation, we can certainly get it to you. And we'll put a reference to that in the show more notes that are surrounding this. This is one that is commonly used because the International Coaching Federation is one of the groups that's fairly recognized. But I also want to acknowledge that there's lots of certification by other people who have their own coaching practice and involving people in what it is that they do. And even universities have picked up coaching and are offering certification like ICF. Now, this notion of partnering with their clients, thought-provoking, creative process, words that are in here, they're personal and professional. They are unlocking untapped sources of imagination, productivity, and leadership. There is something unfolding here, what coaching is tapping into. And I think what I'd like to do is just use this key points here to sort of get at this notion of coaching. Now, coaching is very much about the coach getting involved with the coachee. And it has a bit of what I'll call a verticalness, targeted. If you think of a portrait, when you look at a book, it's in portrait or it's landscape, just depending. When you get into coaching, it has that portrait, vertical down into something that you want to deal with. It's very targeted, and you're getting the coachee involved with you. And for the most part, all right, the vector of question is coach is asking the questions of the coachee. That's not to say the coachee isn't asking the coach question, but the predominance of the questions is going from coach to coachee. It has a little bit more formalness to it because it's about performance improvement. And we liken it to a little bit more like the foreground conversation that happens. Now, if you're in an organization, you'll probably get this one is the lines in the boxes of the organization chart are where formal conversations take place. That's where issues of performance, finance questions, that's where they unfold. So a coach is tapping into this performance improvement, has this bit of foreground conversation, leaning to it, okay? Now, there's usually a set duration, scheduled meetings influenced by the coach. And so it doesn't mean the coachee can't ask for the meetings, but the coach usually is setting it up and saying, okay, what are we going to have done by the next time we meet? We're going to meet, but in 3 days, coachee says yes, no, be 4 days. But there is that sense of a scheduled duration that goes with it. There is certainly a medium assertiveness on behalf of the coachee, and the coach has a bit more assertiveness, but the coachee has a bit more of a medium assertiveness. they're both looking for high cooperation in their conversation. They want to both get in there, but there is a bit more of assertiveness coming from the coach to the coachee. Now, this is one of the things that I enjoy doing. I go back and try to figure out where words come from. So I dug out, well, coach is a word that came out more in a predominance in the Common Era. It was referring to carriage, right? Coach, the horses are pulling a coach, and it was about transport. So it got linked to moving the coachee along, this notion of performance. That's what it was attempting to do. So these are some of the key points that are inside this definition of coaching that I just wanted to bring out for you. And it has this sense at the very end, you'll notice this notion of fulfillment, setting you on a path to greater personal and professional fulfillment through this performance improvement kind of storyline. So I just want to acknowledge that. Now, from a mentoring point of view, this is the one that IMC uses. And do you want to talk a little bit about this one? IMC is the one sharing this. So I just thought, Doug, you want to share a little bit more about it?
I can certainly do that. And same sort of approach that you took, that there are some key words in this definition. Certainly the two-way trusted part. So as I call it, one of the foundational building blocks of a mentoring relationship is trust. And once again, the key word here is trusted relational arrangement, which speaks to that part quite nicely. And it's one where it is a two-way process. So both the mentor and the mentee end up forming, as a result of that two-way relationship, they can form a deeper and richer collaborative alliance, which then translates itself from there into a learning that can take place and learning and growing, or learning and developing on a personal and a professional basis. And so that's really important, or really significant, because in a mentoring approach, we want to be able to target the personal growth first, because that can become obstacles or barriers to being able to address the professional growth.
So in terms of the key points, and again, you can go back and watch the video, or if you have the handout, you can do a little bit of a comparison here. You'll notice that with mentoring, as we're looking at evolvement versus involvement of the person, it has a bit more horizontal, broader landscape feeling to it. Not to say that sometimes when you're mentoring, you may go into the portrait a little bit of targeted, but it tends to have this more openness to it from a mentoring point of view. Predominantly, the mentee's asking questions of the mentor, and it has a little bit more of an informal access, because you're going after the lived experience. And to Doug's point is this personal to the professional. It tends to be with coaching, you're going a little bit more professional to the personal, all right, in terms of the way it's unfolding. There is a potential of longevity to mentoring. Sometimes it can actually get to a point of friendship, and it can last a number of years. That doesn't usually happen with coaching. All right. Not to say that it can't, but usually with mentoring, there is that aspect that can unfold for you. And certainly both, because of this alliance component, is that we're looking for a high assertive, high cooperative conversation to take place. Mentees step into it with the mentor. All right. I appreciate at the very beginning, mentee may be a little hesitant to do that. But at the same time, the mentor is going to be encouraging is that they both show up. Now, again, remember I said I went and checked out a little bit about where it came from, and it taps back into before the Common Era, all right, back into the world of the Greeks. Athena, one of the goddesses, was the educator of Odysseus's son. There is another name for the chap, and I always mispronounce it. It starts with Thesaurus. All right, it's a T word, but actually that male figure was Athena, if you actually go back and look at it. So Athena was the mentor to Odysseus' son. I found that kind of of interesting. So we'll see how that unfolds. Now, there's something here that I want to do, and that is to reach out to you for those who are listening in at this point in time. I might even suggest you stop if you're watching this later and just write down coaching and mentoring, and how do you see the two of them? And do you agree with what Doug and I are sharing here? We have the two definitions, and then we unpack some key points out of those definitions. And I think it might be helpful for you to just do your own work here and then start up the video again and see if what you're writing connects or competes or collaborates with what we're going to be sharing as we unfold this. Because as we go back into the presentation, then what we're doing is we want to take a look at two of the myths. And Doug, you want to just share the myths here because it pertains to both of them, okay?
So I always get asked the question, how old do you have to be a mentor? And the response I always give back is that it's not age specific. So if you get into the true sense of mentoring, and you can learn from your grandchildren, you can learn from anybody, you can have a relational arrangement with anybody, and age is not a factor in any of that. And when the other part for this too is no domain required. We always talk about that from the aspect of having industry-specific experience is a nice to have, not a need to have. And part of that comes back to the whole mentoring process. And in that, I can ask a series of questions. If I haven't got experience, if I don't have industry-specific experience, that gives me a whole bunch of questions that I can ask of my mentee to help us build that trust and help us build that relational arrangement.
There's very similar in terms of coaching. It's not necessarily age specific, is that you could have a younger person coach an older person. I think from mentoring coaching, just using social media, digital marketing, which is used to make that connection. And there's, from a coaching point of view, you don't need a specific domain either, but because you're using a lot more tools and techniques, a deeper aspect, and then diving into using those with the coachee, whereas the mentoring has a little bit more flavor of a conversation, right, than actually getting performance improvement. You have to have some sense of the true use of those tools and techniques. That's not to say the mentor doesn't have to have that, but because, like, for example, a younger person may not have full lived experience and have all the tools and techniques, because they can engage in a assertive, cooperative conversation, you can mentor. Subtle, I know, Doug would agree, subtle, but we're attempting to just bring some awareness to you because there's a couple of other points that we're going to make here. So when it comes to the notion of their connection, and some of this is going to summarize what we've been sharing earlier, is that both coaching and mentoring are like a guide on the ride. Someone who's joining you on your journey, and they are there as a guide. They're not telling you what to do. They're bringing a lot of ideas to the foreground, and I'll use a but there, but in what I just shared, a coach tends to have a little bit more, okay, no, you need to do it this way, versus if a mentor starts saying it, you better take a look at your mentor. Now, what's also interesting is I use this term, they're a wingman to the other. You can use them, but you got to be alert to that. And I'm going to bring a point out here just a little bit later, but they can be a wingman if you know how to use both of them, okay? But if all you have is coaching in your pocket and then you think, well, I'll just slip into mentoring, I don't need to worry about it, that's where we're going to have a little conversation a little later here, okay? Now, one of the things that's important is that you can certainly link up instructing with coaching and facilitating with mentoring. Does it mean you shut down facilitating with coaching or instructing with mentoring? No, again, it's a subtle difference. But from a coaching point of view, performance improvement, you're going to instruct a person in the why you're learning it. From a mentoring, you're using as facilitating is to draw ideas as a mentor from the mentee. So again, just to put things in perspective. Now, here's something that's interesting is for those of you who may be managing and leading, and for the most part, all of us do it. Wherever we are in life, we have a certain managing and leading that's going on. In the managing process, you can certainly use instructing and coaching. In the leading process, you can use facilitating and mentoring. And what I'm talking about managing here is managing the systems for persons, managing the systems for family, managing the systems for friends. In leading, what you're doing is you are leading the person from a system that they're creating to live their lives, to get involved in the project. It's a slightly different look and subtle, just flipping some words around, but it has a different intention that goes with it. Now, the other interesting things is of all the other points that we made, and I'll just come back to this one here, is that from a mentor coach, you can pick these up. But I would encourage you is that if you're taking on the mentor coach role, then you probably would want to hire out trainer, shifter, consultant, and counselor because they're all very specific roles. And I'm leaning more into those of you who are doing something for the workplace in the workplace. I bring that out. But at the same time, you want to be alert, even in your family dynamics and your family constellation. If you attempt to pull all of these together, you might find a little bit of a bumpy road along the way. So I just bring that forward for you. Now, what's interesting is from a competition point of view, and we have someone who's joining us, Doug.
Okay.
And let's just welcome Josie. Is it Josie or Jose?
Yes.
Welcome. Welcome. So it's good to see you, sir.
Thank you so much. I think no one is there.
Yeah. Well, we're just into the presentation and the conversation, and you know that we're recording, correct? Okay. So we'll probably, if you have, we'll answer questions if you have anything that you would like to ask us about. And again, just welcome on behalf of Doug and myself, okay?
Very good, sir. Very good, sir. How are you?
I am well, thank you. I am well. So I'll leave you, if you want to leave your video on, I would probably encourage you to mute yourself. And when the time comes, you can ask questions from there. So thank you.
Very good, very good. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of looking at coaching and mentoring through the lens of competition, how they might clash with one another, they don't necessarily integrate. There are ways that they bounce off of each other. Here is a few for your consideration. In the definition of each is the outcome that's required. So from a coaching point of view, it's the transporting of someone to get to some end, and therefore it has this performance improvement flavor to it. You're transporting that person. In the mentoring is that you are guiding that person, yes, using guide on the ride, and I know they're both, but it's being with that person over time, sharing conversation and moving them forward. But it doesn't mean that the outcome is improved performance. It's about evolving you as a person and in your profession as well. So in the definitions, you will find the outcome, and that's important to take a look at it from that perspective. Now, here's a word to the wise is when you coach, you coach. When you mentor, you mentor. Now, this point came up years ago. I was watching a video by a chap by the name of, his last name was DeWitt. He was a photographer for National Geographic. And he went and interviewed someone who was in Scotland, and she was a weaver. And he said, what's the most important thing that you need to pay attention to when you're weaving and doing the craft as you are? And she says, when I weave, I weave. And that struck me, and I went, when you coach, you coach. When you mentor, you mentor. Because I bring this up, they're not the same thing. Even though I've had many people, and I've actually worked in organizations, and someone says, well, they're both the same thing. No, yes, they're in the guide on the ride way of looking at things, but they're not the same thing. You don't interchange those two terms. So if you're going to coach, you coach. When you mentor, you mentor. Anything you want to add to that, Doug? Is because I know from a deep practice point of view, you have coached and do coach. I have done them, but I prefer to mentor. Anything you want to add to that from a practice point of view?
What I've seen take place, and I've done this, I don't know, probably half a dozen times, where they have an employee that hasn't responded well to coaching, and so they're looking at actually termination, and they've brought me in, and I've used, the process and the mentoring methodology that we use. I've used that, and I've been able to facilitate or initiate a behavioral change that's got the employee back on track. And it was done using, like I said, it was done using mentoring techniques.
And that comes to a point that I want to raise here to what Doug is sharing, because Doug's example was that there was a break between the coaching and the mentoring. And what some people do, and that's why this interchangeableness of coaching and mentoring, folks, be alert to this. And it's to this point. When coaching does not work, mentoring is not the alternative in that immediate moment. Because mentoring has this deeper, richer relationship that has formed up. And that's not always the case with coaching. If you're a coach and you find that you have to pop into mentoring, maybe to take a look at something or to help the person out, then make sure that there is a discernible break between the coaching and the mentoring. Don't just slide from coaching into mentoring. It doesn't work that way. But the interesting thing is that if you're mentoring with someone and there's a bit of a hiccup, an issue, a block, you could move into coaching with declaration. This is important. Declare you're going to go in and just help to unblock it because it's important to the conversation. Now, so I'm just going to ask you, when you are listening to this, if it doesn't quite connect, just stop the video, go back a minute or so, and just listen to it again and put it in relationship to what it is that we're sharing here in all the slides before and the slides that are going to follow. When you're coaching, don't immediately slide into mentoring, but if you're mentoring, you can, with declaration, move into coaching. So just be alert to that as that unfolds for you. Now, from a collaboration, how do they work together? And they might fit together in terms like hand and glove, that you can work with. Again, as a reminder, they're a guide on the ride, while journey aware of the outcome required. Is the people are on a journey, both of them are guide on the ride, but it pertains to the outcome. And when you know what those outcomes are, then there is a similarity in terms of this guide on the ride flavor that unfolds. You can use similar tools and techniques like asking questions, right? So there are tools and techniques that are available that you can bring together. And someone the other day said, you know what, I'm getting tired of the use of the toolbox. What would happen if we had a backpack? And I sat back and I went, this is interesting. Yeah, you can have some tools and techniques and that, and they can be in a backpack that you just put over your shoulders. Seems to be a little bit more informality using backpack than toolbox. So again, just a story of something that happened. I thought I'd share that out. Now, the other collaborative point is they support the organization of work when using managing and leading perspectives. Hinted at that already because, again, they're a guide on the ride. They're helping to move someone forward, all right? There is an element of outcome intention that supports them, but it's that journey, the movement along, the interaction that takes place. Here's an interesting and subtle element. Coaching has a word like partnership. Mentoring has a word like alliance. Partnership has a little bit more of a contractual, formal. Alliance has, well, it's a little bit more open and you don't necessarily have to have a contract, or if it is, it might be an email that says, yes, I agree to work with you. Again, just looking at some of the terms that have gone before is just something to take a look at this point in time. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to take a look at a little bit more about coaching and mentoring. And the way to look at this is if you think about a stick has two ends. And these are like two ends of a stick that if you pick up one end of the stick, there is the other end of the stick gets moved as well. So if I pick up this pen, right, it moves the other end of the pen. One of the things to think about as we move through these next number of slides is what would happen is if you picked up the middle of these two and were able to work with both of them in being able to bring this forward, rather than picking up one end and saying, this is what I'm going to use, right? And I'm not going to use the other end. What would happen if you picked up the middle and worked with both? That's what we're attempting to get to at this point in time. So here's the first one. Coaching has a bit more of a foreground conversation, mentoring as a bit more background conversation. Now, I explained a little bit about the foreground conversation. I'll use organization charts as an example. Lines and boxes, foreground conversation. The white space, everything in between, is the background conversation. This notion of coaching as a bit more of a portrait flavor, mentoring as a bit more of a landscape flavor to it. And to be able to see both of those, okay, as they unfold is kind of important, okay? Now, what I'm going to do here is bring them back up online. I just noticed I hadn't brought them up online. So this is that first stick component, coaching and mentoring. The next one I want to take a look at is coaching and mentoring through words like required and requested. Coaching has a certain, this is what's required of you, dear coachee, okay? And therefore, coach, this is what's required of you to do. Now, the difference here is required is a word that suggests no wiggle room. Requested, there's a bit of wiggle. So in coaching, we're attempting to get you to not have wiggle room, get on and get done what needs to get done. But at times there's some requested elements to coaching. But with mentoring, it's very much requested. There's wiggle room. You're interacting, you're asking the questions. There's sometimes as a mentor, you might ask for something that's required. Let me give you a really good example is, if you're not going to be showing up for the meeting, then it's required that you give me at least 24 hours notice. Okay, these kind of things. Then those have a little bit more of the formality that goes with it, okay? The next one I'd like to take a look at is coaching tends to go more after the thought patterns, whereas mentoring will bring in the feelings aspect. I'm not saying coaching is, there's no emotions talked about and there's no feeling. That's not what I'm getting at. But the mentoring is, you might ask a little bit more about, what's happened, what happened for you, is what you're learning, does that give you a bit more inspiration and enthusiasm to move forward? Coaching, you don't usually say, okay, are you now inspired? Are you enthused? Because you're attempting to get the performance improvement done and take it from that perspective, okay? So the next one I like to take a look at is this notion of role model. Coaching doesn't tend to be a role model. You don't think of yourself being with the coach and you're going, my coach is a role model, unless you're going to become a coach. Okay, that makes sense. But mentoring, there's a possibility of a role model because, and I'll use an example, is when a young person ends up with a mentor, and maybe at school, and maybe it's someone who's in grade 12 to a grade 10 or grade 9, you might go, geez, I like where you're coming from, the life that you're building for yourself. There's elements of that I'd like to have for myself. And it seems that you're involved in a couple of clubs at school. You play one of the sports. So I haven't thought about any of that. Maybe that's something I would like to take a look at. And they look at it from a role model point of view. So that's what I'm attempting to get at this point in time. So now I know he's muted. So the next one I'd like to offer is, now this is again a bit of a play on words. Coaching has a certain, there's specific, it's accurate, and it's simple, right? Your specific certain skills or knowledge you want to get across, it has to be accurate, and you got to keep it a little bit simple. Whereas mentoring, you can play a bit more general. Wayward, I like the word, okay, because the sort of the flip side of accurate is non-accurate. I want to have a little bit of fun here using wayward and the notion of complex. So with mentoring, you can be a bit more general. You can play, you can go in different fields, right, to find out what's going on. You can deal with a little bit more of the complexity of what's taking place. And so again, just to see the sort of the two ends of the stick here, picking up how could you use both of those as it unfolds for you. This one I found, remember I mentioned earlier, is that I did a little bit of YouTube research, and someone said coaching is sort of involves a race. You're competing and you're completing. When you're mentoring, is it a race? I kind of like that metaphor in terms of looking at the two of them. Again, the race is got to compete, got to complete, got to get it done. Mentoring as well, we're not really in a race. We could be walking, we could be, right? You could be running, but not in a running race kind of idea. So I thought it was just a kind of an interesting metaphor to work with. Another one was coaching certainly leans into the competence and consequences, whereas mentoring has a flavor of character and conditions. And the competence and the consequences from coaching, again, is this moving towards a very definitive outcome. Character conditions has a bit more of an outcome that has a little bit more openness to it, and just in the words themselves. Another way to look at it from a coaching is coaching, the coach asks questions for the coachee to answer, is mentoring the mentee questions for mentors' answers. Again, it's this notion of coach asks questions to coachee, mentee asks questions of the mentor. Not that they don't do the flip, but again, it's the predominant way of using the questions. Another thing is that coaching tends to use results. They have a bit of a quantitative flavor than qualitative. Mentoring has the sense of the outcomes that we're going to be looking at, and it has a bit more of a qualitative than quantitative look to it. So again, just using elements of picking up that stick and working with the two ends of it. Another one I bring to your attention is, again, someone else shared this. I thought it was kind of interesting. We've heard it in many other ways and many other presentations along the way. Coaching is sort of as coloring the lines. Mentoring is you can color outside the lines. And I sort of think there's something to be said for that one. And again, at the very beginning, we talked a little bit about coaching is about involvement, getting you in. Mentoring is about evolvement and growing and developing in ways where you are unfolding a lot more. So coaching has a bit of a performance structural connection, the how to who. Mentoring is about potentiality, about relational arrangement from who to how. Let me just go back. Coaching, performance, structural connection, how to who. Mentoring, potentiality, relational arrangement, who to how. And that is one of the bigger distinctions that Doug and I constantly talk about, is just a simple who and how. If you notice, who and how are made up of the same letters, but they have two different words, and depending on which directionality vector you use, how to who, coaching, who to how, mentoring. Again, offer to you folks. If it makes sense, that's great. again, I just want to remind you is that no matter what happens with coaching and mentoring, you're looking to improve, focus, and strengthen. All right. That's one of the reasons that you're coaching and mentoring. Guide on the ride. You want to improve something, focus something, or strengthen something. And depending on which way you're going to go about doing it, whether you're a coach or whether you're a mentor, this improve, focus, and strengthen. So the three questions that we would certainly ask as you move forward is, so what does this mean to you? What are you going to do with what you've learned? What else do you need to learn and know more about? And now what are you going to do? And we encourage you to figure out, if you're interacting with someone, how might I help improve? Or what aspect of their life might we focus on? Or what can we do to strengthen my relationship with someone? Or to strengthen how we work together, and how might I use coaching and mentoring to be able to do that? So constantly remind yourself it's improve, focus, and strengthen, and keep these three questions in mind. So what else, now what? So as we draw to a close this conversation, and again, I will open it up because I know Doug has to drop off here in about a minute or so. I just want to remind you about certification in becoming competent as a mentor. We offer that through the International Mentoring Community. And I'm going to give fair credit to the International Coaching Federation. You get certification as a coach. I don't know if they would use the word competent or competence at ICF. And again, I'm not trying to take away from them. So, but we do use the word competence and competent in the IMC. We do a verification system, and you can certainly learn more about that as you get involved with the community. And we encourage you to get involved because it's a way to evolve your life using a mentoring approach. So again, just in closing off, website's internationalmentoringcommunity.com. The email is allthingsmentor@gmail.com. That's our temporary one for the moment. You can certainly use that. That's always available to get a hold of us. We're just doing a little bit of an adjustment to our email systems. And contact us to chat about obtaining your certification. We're certainly open to that at any point in time. So just in my own final words, just remember, from a coaching and mentoring point of view, you're a guide on the ride. Coaching has a little bit more of a performance, foreground conversation flavor to it. You're still attempting to help the coachee improve, focus, and strengthen. Mentoring has this bit more of a background conversation that's to evolve, open up a person to be able to access a lot more. And it has that flavor of being more landscape. And again, it's still to improve, focus, and strengthen. But in either way, when you coach and mentor, make sure you ask the coachee and the mentee, so what else, now what? Just as Doug and I ask you who are watching it, what are the answers you give to so what else, now what, having listened in to this presentation on coaching and mentoring. Now, I know, Doug, you have to drop off. I will stay here with Mr. Jose and see if I can able to hear his question, and it will be here later on to work with. So, Doug, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it, and we'll catch up to you later. Okay?
Yeah, take care.